Explanation of the book, Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, by the writer and psychotherapist Lori Gottlieb. Here I will dive into the various aspects of the book, starting from the psychoanalysis of the characters and reaching the philosophy that the book tries to convey about psychotherapy, identity, meaning, and emotional and mental change. Introduction. The book has a double journey inside the human psyche. The book is not just memoirs or articles about psychotherapy, but rather a deep exploratory journey that takes the reader inside the minds of 4 psychiatric patients, as well as inside the mind of the therapist herself, who suddenly finds herself in the position of the client. Through this journey, the book reveals to us a lot about human nature, identity conflicts, fear of death, midlife crisis, human relationships, and the importance of emotional understanding of the self. What distinguishes this book from other psychological books is that it is not a clinical guide directed at specialists in psychology, but rather an intertwined literary and psychological narrative that addresses the human psyche through complex stories that are close to each one of us. It is a book that speaks to everyone, whether they are going through a crisis, searching for meaning, or just someone who wants to understand life and relationships on a deeper level. Chapter 1. Gottlieb as a therapist. When the therapist becomes the patient, the internal conflict between the two roles, the therapist and the patient. The story begins with Lori Gottlieb introducing herself as a therapist, but after experiencing a trauma in her personal life, she finds herself in the position of the patient. Here appears the first conflict in the book. Can the therapist admit his weakness? Does the psychiatrist need treatment? From the beginning, Gottlieb adopts a deeply human perspective, showing that the therapist is not a supernatural being immune to pain, but rather a person who is going through emotional problems, suffering from loss, anxiety, and fear, like everyone else. Why did Gottlieb go to therapy? Gottlieb's image of love and relationships collapses when her lover suddenly leaves her, which leaves her in a state of sadness and psychological loss. Here, the core idea of the book becomes clear. How do we face emotional pain, and how do we understand ourselves when circumstances change around us? For the first time, Gottlieb finds herself on the couch instead of the usual chair she sits in as a therapist. Her sessions begin with the psychotherapist Wendell, who plays the role of the wise teacher in the story, as he helps her discover the feelings she has been trying to deny or suppress. Hence comes the first philosophical question in the book. How do we know if we are facing our pain, or are we just running away from it? Chapter 2. An in-depth psychological analysis of the 4 patients. One of the deepest strengths of this book is the way Gottlieb presents the stories of 4 different psychopaths, each of whom represents an example of a widespread psychological problem. 1. John, the man who thinks he doesn't need therapy. John's character analysis. What does success mean? John is a middle-aged man, professionally successful, but arrogant and verbally violent. At first, he seems like someone who doesn't need treatment and even despises the idea of going to a therapist. But we soon discover that he is suffering from a deep inner crisis as he faces feelings of anger and loss that he has been unable to express in a healthy way. Psychological points in John's story. The mask of false strength. John represents many people who hide their weakness behind a veil of false strength and social superiority. Rejection of emotional vulnerability. He feels ashamed to admit that he is suffering, but eventually discovers that acceptance is the first step towards healing, rediscovering the self. Over time, John begins to understand that his problem is not with the people around him, but with the way he sees himself. 2. Jennifer. The woman facing death. Jennifer character. Analysis. What does it mean to die? Jennifer is a terminally ill patient who knows that her life is about to end. Through her sessions with Gottlieb, we see how she faces death and how she goes through the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally acceptance. Psychological lessons from Jennifer's story. Death is not just the end, it can be the beginning of a deeper understanding of life. The true value of life is revealed when we realize its limitations. Even in the most difficult moments, a person can find meaning in his life. 3. Marcy, the woman who afraid of love. Marcy's character analysis. Why are we afraid of relationships? Marcy is a successful woman, but suffers from chronic emotional problems. She cannot stay in a stable relationship, and when she begins to feel emotionally close to someone, she runs away. Psychological points in Marcy's story. Fear of love is sometimes the result of previous experiences in childhood. Escape from relationships may be a way to protect oneself from potential harm. Treatment does not mean getting rid of negative feelings, but rather understanding them and dealing with them consciously. 4. William. The young man who suffered from depression. William's character analysis. How do we feel worthless? William is a young man in his 20s who suffers from severe depression, feels aimless, and sees no meaning in his life. Through his therapy sessions, we see how depression is not just sadness, but a mental state that prevents a person from seeing anything positive in life. Psychological points from William's story. Depression is not just a sad feeling, but a disorder that affects the way a person thinks about themselves in the world. Finding emotional support is the first key to getting out of depression. No one should go through depression alone. Conclusion. What does the book teach us about life and psychotherapy? Ultimately, maybe you should talk to someone is more than just a book about psychotherapy. It is a profound meditation on the meaning of life, fear, pain, love, and identity. The book asks a profound question. Are we able to see ourselves honestly? And do we have the courage to ask for help when we need it? It is a book that makes us rethink our relationship with ourselves and encourages us to understand that psychotherapy is not weakness, but one of the deepest forms of strength. If you have arrived here, you are a person searching for a deep understanding of life. Lori Gottlieb's story. When the therapist becomes the patient. 1. The beginning, emotional trauma. Lori Gottlieb was living a successful life as a psychotherapist, helping others overcome their emotional and psychological crises. Her relationship with her lover was going well, and they were planning to get married. But suddenly, without any warning, her lover decided to leave her. She was shocked because she did not expect this. She tried to analyze the situation rationally, as she does with her patients. But she found herself drowning in feelings of sadness, disappointment, and endless questions. Did he really love me? Why didn't I see this breakup coming? Is there something wrong with me? As the days passed, she began to suffer from insomnia, sudden crying fits, and loss of focus in her work. She was used to providing support to others, but now she felt like a patient who needed help. 2. The decision to go to a psychotherapist. After an internal struggle, Lori decided to seek help from another psychotherapist, Wendell. This decision was difficult for her because she believed she could deal with her feelings on her own, as she always did. But she realized that a therapist, no matter how professional, is still a human being who needs support too. When she went into her first session, she felt embarrassed and shy, but she knew she needed these sessions. She was hesitant at first, but Wendell was a good listener and helped her unlock the door to repressed feelings. 3. Discovering the real wound. As the sessions went on, Lori began to realize that the pain she was feeling was not just because of the loss of a loved one, but because it reopened old wounds she had never faced before. She began to understand that she had a recurring pattern in relationships, where she always chose people who looked good on paper, but were unable to commit emotionally. And here comes one of the most profound lessons in the book. Sometimes the current crisis is just a reflection of an older wound that we have not yet faced. During the sessions, Lori recalled how, as a child, she had a painful experience with her parents, where she did not feel that she was getting enough attention. These old feelings were ingrained in her subconscious, causing her to always choose emotionally unstable partners, as if she was reenacting the old experience. 4. How did Lori change? As therapy continued, Lori began to see herself more clearly. She realized that she was unconsciously searching for love and that she was trying to fill an old void inside her. Instead of seeing herself as a victim of betrayal or failure, she began to understand that this experience was an opportunity for growth and change. She became more aware of her emotional choices and more able to deal with her feelings in a healthy way. 5. The deep lesson of the story. Emotional pain is not just a result of the current event, but may be linked to old, unresolved traumas. Even a therapist needs another therapist sometimes, because we are all human and need someone to help us understand ourselves. Psychotherapy is not just about getting rid of the pain, it is a journey to deeper self-understanding and freeing oneself from recurring patterns. Ultimately, Lori Gottlieb learned that pain can be a gateway to positive change and that asking for help is not a sign of weakness, but a courageous step toward personal growth.